So speaking of sports, how many of you are going to be watching the Winter Olympics? Do you guys like the Winter Olympics? Anybody in here? Yes, a few of you, yeah. Maybe a little less popular than the Summer Olympics, but yeah, Winter Olympics is cool. I like them. I actually, it's a little hard for me to to know that it's even happening, like since the Super Bowl hasn't even happened, but I've started getting into it just a little bit. I stumbled onto this guy. This is one of the sports that I really like is speed skating, okay? The suits are kind of weird, right? Like that full body and the bubble head thing. That's kind of strange to me. But it is otherwise. It's pretty awesome, right? These guys are super fast. They're super graceful. I mean, it's just a really fun sport. Sometimes they wipe out, which is like epic stuff. And it's just a lot of fun. And so this guy in particular, and I feel like, I don't know if the picture is blurred because it's actually just impossible to take a focus picture of somebody moving that fast or something, but oh, there goes our screens. That happens if you've been around here. That happens to us all the time for reasons that no one can explain. But yeah, this guy his name is Niels van der Poot, I think. He's Swedish. That's all you need to know. And Niels, as I will refer to him from now on, in 2022, in Beijing, he came out of nowhere. Nowhere. No one was really really expecting it. There was several other favorites. Like, he was good, but they weren't. He was not the favorite. And he came out of nowhere to win the gold medal. I think in like the 5,000 or maybe the 10,000. And in particular, in his race, he was like going around track like he was actually behind the leader the whole time. The guy had gone before him was the one who thought he was going to win gold. Like the entire time, this poor guy who's watching, he's like, oh yeah, I got this. He's in the lead by a good bit. And then in the last lap, Niels comes from behind with this epic last lap and wins the gold handily. And in fact, he actually wins the Olympic record for the event. So very, very impressive stuff. And the reason why I'm talking about Niels is because he actually wrote, besides being a speed skater, he actually wrote this 62-page, what he called a non-manifesto. I think if you have to call it a non-manifesto, it probably is a manifesto. But he wrote this very, very extensive document about how he trained. And I don't know if are there any distance endurance athletes in here? I don't know, I'm looking around the room. There, Chris Mackey, yes. Yep. Yeah. Right. Something more than from here to the parking lot. Yeah. But yeah. So, so some of you who have maybe trained before for distance things, you might know this. But for the rest of us, I learned something about training in these sorts of things that is really quite counterintuitive, which is that you're going after this big race, and you're training, you go harder, you add more distance, you push yourself further, right? All along the way to build up to this event. And what they actually tell you to do at the end, right before the event, is you actually back off at the end. You taper. Is what they call it in training language, which is like super counterintuitive. And Niels here actually took that even further to an extreme. He actually takes 2 days off, as much as 2 days off during his normal training every week, which is super unusual. And then his taper actually reduced all the way down in the week before this gold medal Olympic record race. He reduced it almost down to like nothing at all. It said he was basically doing a little bit of light bike work and doing just a few times around the tracks each day. He was essentially doing nothing. It was just like super, super counterintuitive. It was even shocking to the people in the sports world that were like, wow, that's what you did? And in the end, it was like, I guess it worked for him, right? So it's just this counterintuitive, not what you would expect last step. That's what Niels kind of showed me this week when I was looking at him. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit this week. Well, so we've been in this series called Everyone Gets to Play. Everyone gets to play. It's this old Vineyard phrase that the founder, one of the primary founders of Vineyard, John Wimber, said, which really is based on the idea that every single one of you, if you are a follower of Jesus, every single one of us, God has many, 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 many things for us to do. Did you know that? Every single one of you. There's no exceptions to that. He has many, many, many things for us to do. In ministering and doing the works of the kingdom is not just something that's reserved for a select few. It's not after you've received certain training. It's not after anything. It's really just something that's built into the actual part of faith. And so that's something that we highly value, is doing the stuff of the kingdom, doing the work of the kingdom. And so that's what Everyone Gets to Play is about. And, we started the first week. I showed you this magazine cover that the Lord kind of dropped in my lap, right? About how to make anything. And what I felt like God showed me in that is that really we have a vision to become a people who do anything Jesus calls us to for the sake of the kingdom. Anything. And that could be big things, that could be small things, that can be everyday things, that could be really, really risky things, but that anything and everything that Jesus calls us to do, that we would feel a responsiveness, we'd feel an equipping, we'd feel the ability to be able to do that. And so we also have been saying this kind of, these couple of sentences here, because we feel like they're pretty important to establishing what we mean by that, right? Is that when we're talking about doing the supernatural work, the kingdom work, what makes an action supernatural is where it comes from, not what it looks like. If it's directed and empowered by God, it's kingdom stuff, okay? If it's directed and empowered by God, it's kingdom stuff. It doesn't have to look like these obviously supernatural or obviously flashy God things. We want all that also, but it can be all sorts of things, right? In fact, what I wanted to do this morning is add a little bit of a corollary to that, okay? A little bit of an extension on this phrase we've been saying, okay? Can I do that? So one more thing is to just ask, right, if it's directed and empowered by God, are there things, in fact, that God does not want to direct or empower? Are there things that God doesn't want to direct or empower? It's something that maybe for some of you guys, the question is, I don't know, I'm not sure. Maybe it's no, I don't know. But I think in our kingdom theology, right, what we mean by what God's kingdom is that it's his rule and reign throughout life. Starting within us, it's all throughout our lives in every part. And so I think that really God wants to direct and empower everything. Everything. I think everything that we do, okay? Now that's a really pretty tall bar. And again, for some of you, that's like, I don't know if I believe that, which is okay. Some of you might kind of even have a little bit of a deist mentality, right? God kind of made everything, he set up the world, and then he wound the clock up, and then he just sort of let us go, right? That is a perspective to have. And if that's your perspective, that's cool. We welcome you here. We love that. We love that you're here. But in our theology and how we think about things, we actually think God cares about everything, out of his love and his grace. Not because he's waiting for you to screw something up, or because he's always has lots of super specific instructions. Certainly not because you're a robot and you just are taking instructions from him and executing him. It's actually the opposite of that. It's really because of the relationship that God is after with us that he cares about really, literally everything that I think we do. And so God wants to direct and empower everything. And so what we've talked about so far, just again by way of review here, is that the way that looks, right, to be able to, that everyone gets to play, to be doing the stuff, is the first thing is that we need to be in Jesus' love. We need to be in his love. We need to be operating from this secure place of being attachment to God. We need to know that, like it says in Romans, that while we were yet sinners, before we had done anything at all, God demonstrated his love to us before we had done anything. In fact, we'd done lots of things that he didn't like, lots of things against him. But while we were yet sinners, he demonstrated his love by dying for us, by coming to save us, right? So we need to operate in Jesus' love. Peggy talked about that, and then the second week we talked about listening for Jesus' voice. So during the Snowmageddon that we had a few weeks ago, which it's amazing that the snow still hasn't melted. I don't know if that ever happens in St. Louis. It's like, it's almost gone. We're almost there. But we talked about the fact that we want to then be listening for Jesus' voice out of that place of secure attachment, out of that place of really knowing God's love, that it doesn't matter what you do or you don't do, that God loves you. From that place, we listen for Jesus' voice. We orient ourselves towards what he is saying, believing that he does have things to say. And I was having dinner this week with Doug and David, and we're just talking about how things are going on in the church, and this thing just kind of came out of my mouth that I thought I would repeat, and it was like, just for right now, for me, being pastoring and leading here, it's like, if I could have one flip of the switch, if I could ever pick like one thing to just sort of have change in our church right now, it would be that all of us who are believers, who are followers of Jesus, that like our confidence level that Jesus actually speaks, that we could hear God's voice, that it would just get like turned way up, way up. That's what I would hope for. That's what I would pray for, right? Because I think that a lot of us know that theologically or intellectually, we think that God speaks. And I think actually in our church, in our congregation, this isn't true for all of churches by any means, but I think in our church we actually have a great humility around like not saying things like, well, God said blah, 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 and like having a lot of false, self-righteousness in that or pride in that. I don't think that's us, actually. I think we have a lot of humility around it. No, I think our struggle a lot of times is really more along the lines of, well, I don't know that God really said that. I don't know if I can really hear God. I don't know. It seems like other people can do it better than me, Like that's more our struggle, right? So if there was something that I would want, right? Like something that I would pray for, that I wish God would do, it would be that we would gain confidence that no, we can. If we're following Jesus, why wouldn't it be God? He does want to speak. He is speaking to you. You can hear him. And so we want to listen for Jesus' voice. It's an orientation. It's not about getting it all right. It's about being pointed towards him. And then last week, as I mentioned, David was up here, and he said that we need to follow through then with Jesus' invitations. We need to do, right? We need to do. We find out actually so much of the learning in doing the stuff of Jesus is actually taking that step, taking the step of actually trying, right? Trying. Maybe you don't know for sure that it's what God's saying, but you try it anyways. And I love one of the things that he said was that it's both in the giving and the receiving. Both things. Sometimes what God is asking you to do is to receive something. And sometimes what he's asking you to do is to give, right? So both of those things, whether it's big or small, okay? And so as we go through these things, right, that's just a quick summary. We would tend then at that point to either stop, maybe that's the end, but no, that's not all. Okay? There is one more thing that I want to talk about this morning, okay? There's one more thing. Because here's what ends up happening a lot of times when even if we've kind of done all this, okay? Even if we've sort of gone through all these phases or these components, what ends up happening a lot of times is we'll do something and then we will begin immediately, either consciously or maybe sometimes subconsciously, we'll judge the outcome of what happened, right? We'll look at whether that felt good or not, whatever happened, whatever it is that we did. It's like, do I feel like that went well? Again, it might even be subconscious. Did it go well? Did it not go well? And one of two things can happen a lot of times, right? This is just, I think, what our intuition is. The first thing that could happen is, man, that was awesome. That was so great. I loved it so much. Man, that was incredible. I'm so excited. And we should always do that, right? I'm going to always I need to stay in this place as long as possible, right? A lot of times it's those mountaintop experiences. I think of like Peter, right? In the mount where Jesus was transfigured. You guys remember that one? right? So that he has this incredible experience. It's like literally a mountaintop experience. He's with Jesus, and there's, I think Elijah and Moses, right, are with him, like bodily somehow. It's this insane spiritual experience. And what's Peter's reaction? Let's pitch a tent here, right? You should always do this. This is amazing. This is the only thing that we should do. This is where I want to stay. This feels so awesome, right? That's one thing. That's one part of our intuition, is if when it goes well, we're like, we want to do this forever. Let's do this every day. Let's do this every month, whatever it is. The other side is, even sometimes when it went well, we'll let our little disappointments, or just maybe the tiredness, or whatever it is, little insecurities that creep in, or maybe it was a catastrophe and it was a disaster, whatever we did, okay? But wherever it falls on that spectrum, we'll let the outcome force us to decide, you know what, I'm not going to do that anymore. That did not go the way that I wanted to. I'm disappointed. And we'll just decide, again, sometimes subconsciously, that we're done with that. We're just going to stop. Nope, not again. And those, I think, are not the responses that are best for us. I think Jesus actually has something better for us. I think what he wants for us to do as we go through these things, right? The last thing, the sort of counterintuitive last part, is what I'm going to call this morning relying on Jesus' sufficiency. Relying on his sufficiency, okay? And so I want to talk about, first of all, what that means, and then we'll talk a little bit about why that's so good, okay? And so to do that, I'm going to just go back to a couple of verses that we've already been in, okay? And there are verses we've already been in this series, and there are verses that we talk about a lot from up here. In fact, I would say, we don't talk a lot about Bible memorization, but if you're going to memorize something, these couple of verses we're going to go through, I would love to have them drilled into your heads. This is core stuff for our church, okay? And so what does it mean to rely on Jesus' sufficiency? I'm just going to give you two things, okay? The first thing is to do only what God says. Do only what God says, not less, not more, okay? Let's see what it says in John 5:19. So what we talked about a couple weeks ago, and David mentioned it last week. Very truly, I tell you, this is what Jesus is saying, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son does also. Only. And so this is really about, I think you could hear this, all right? There's a way to hear this that says, oh man, I got to walk this sort of tightrope, right? I need to kind of really be careful not to fall off to one side or the other. I don't want to be doing stuff I shouldn't be doing, and I don't want to not be doing stuff I should be doing, right? And just kind of to feel almost nervous and anxious about that. I don't think that's the spirit of what Jesus is saying, right? I think this is an attitude, this is an approach, this is a way of really an aspiration, a way of seeing how we do things, is that really I want to do only what God has said, right? I don't want to do less than that. And so often we do less than that, right? So often we don't do what David talked about last week as far as taking that step. We hear maybe that God is saying something. Maybe sometimes we even know for sure God has said that, and yet we still don't do it. Well, we don't want to do that. We do not want to do less than what Jesus has called us to do, okay? But at the same time, we don't want to do more. We don't want to do more than what Jesus has said. You guys remember back in Genesis in the garden, that the serpent, when he's approaching Eve, this is it before they take the bite of the apple, right, or the bite of the fruit. And Satan uses this little phrase, right, that is it's from Satan, right? So it's can this be good? But I actually want to turn this around for us. He says this little phrase to Eve to insert doubt into the situation and to kind of get him into this track towards the fall. And he said, did God really say? Those little words, did God really say? Okay. Well, I want to redeem those words for you this morning. Can I do that? We're on the other side of the fall, right? We're dealing with all these things. And I would say that there's some there's some really helpful attitude in that if we give that to Jesus. Did God really say? Right? Like, so often, if we're not busy ignoring what God is saying, we are busy running way far ahead of him. Right? You guys know that? We're just like, oh, we took this little piece and off to the races, like the speed skater, right? Did God really say that you should do all for all eternity and all these things that follow along with that? Maybe, but check, right? We want to have this attitude that says that we only do what God says. That's what Jesus' own attitude is here, right? The Son can do nothing by himself, nothing. He can only do what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Son does, whatever the Father does, the Son does also, okay? Okay, so that's the first thing. Do only what God says, not more, not less. Have that as your attitude, okay? Here's the second thing. Get the role straight, okay? Get the role straight. God is the one that does the actual work, as it turns out. When it comes to doing the stuff, when it comes to the work of the kingdom, the person who's actually responsible, the one who actually has authority and the responsibility, is God. Our role, and we say this around here all the time, and we'll say it till we're blue in the face, our role is to trust him. The effort that we put in is in yielding to him. That's it. We're not responsible for anything else other than yielding to what he is saying. That is where our effort is. No, God is the one who does the actual work. And it really means that recognizing what God has already done. Again, another verse that we are in a lot, okay, is from Colossians 2. David just talked about this. Colossians 2, verse 6. Therefore, as you receive Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, okay? And we already talked about this last week, so I'll try to be quick about this. But I don't know. I couldn't help but really think about this quite a lot this week for this topic, okay? So what we talked about last week is what it means. David did a great job just kind of actually talking. Many of you spoke about what it meant to be saved. And I just want to say, like, being a Christian, I want to talk actually for a second to some of you younger folks, you guys who have grown up in church, right? And maybe that's for you older folks too, I don't know. If you've grown up in church, like, that's really cool. If you grew up in the faith, that's such a gift. You should thank whoever has done that for you, your parents or whoever brings you to church. Like, that is a huge gift, okay? But growing up with faith, growing up in church does not make you a Christian. It does not, okay? It's a great gift, but it doesn't make you a Christian. And in fact, believing in God does not make you a Christian. Everybody believes in God, pretty much. I don't know. I honestly don't know if there's truly, genuinely any atheists in the world. Okay, that's another discussion. But pretty much everybody believes in God. Okay, it's not even believing that Jesus existed, and not even necessarily believing theological things correctly. That's important, right? Not even just having good experiences with Jesus or thinking fondly of him or any of that. It's not. Being a Christian, fundamentally, sort of definitionally, is about realizing that you were not sufficient to save yourself. You cannot save yourself. I cannot save myself. That is the definition of what it means to be a Christian. Okay? So that's actually just like a great check, especially if with those of us who've grown up in church and stuff. It's like, do I think I'm a Christian because, I just hang around Christians and my family's Christian, all that? Or do I know that I'm a Christian because I've recognized and accepted and embraced the fact that I know I can't save myself? That it's actually Jesus is the only one who can save, right? So that's what being a Christian means when he says, therefore, as you have received Christ, okay, so walk in him. So walk in him. So that same principle, what does it mean to rely on Jesus' sufficiency? That carries on into the rest of your life with Jesus. You don't save yourself. He doesn't save you, in the macro heaven and hell sort of way, but then you have to save yourself in the rest of your life. That's not how this works. Okay? I thought of, I don't know if this thought just came to my mind. I thought it was funny. You might not think it's funny, but I think it's funny. But I thought of a person, okay? Maybe it's you, okay? Just imagine yourself. It's like you've been in the desert, okay? Maybe you've been running this marathon. You've just been exerting all this effort, and you're in this dry and weary land, and you're like almost going to die. And all of a sudden, you see like this giant body of water, this body of fresh water, and you go to it, and you're like, oh my gosh, I found the water, right? And it's just like this infinite source of wonderful, refreshing water. You getting the picture here, right? It's like you've just been looking for this, and this is the thing that you've found. And you get there and you're just like drinking it up and you're splashing around. You're so happy, right? You're so happy you found salvation, okay? So just imagine that. Imagine also then that you had with you, I don't know, something else. Maybe this is where it gets strange, but maybe it's a plant, okay? I don't know. Maybe you like to grow things. You just have a plant with you for some reason. I don't know. Maybe it's a pet. I don't know. Something else. Something else with you that also needs water. Okay? Okay? Are you coming? You're going with me. I can tell. Yeah. The way that we live our lives sometimes is like in that picture, and we have these things that also need water, and we have found the source, of limitless water, and we go up to it, and we drink it in. But then we look at the other things that need water, and we're like, I wonder if there's enough water for those things. I wonder if that water is actually good enough for these other things that need water. And we just kind of like sit in front of this thing, and we pretend like there's not actually this limitless source of water in front of us, and that it's not somehow good enough, right? I think we live our lives that way sometimes, right? Like that somehow the things that saved us is not good enough for the much smaller issues that we have in our lives. Like the most supernatural, the most impossible thing that has happened to you in your life is that you were saved. And so there's never going to be anything else that is not sufficient for. Okay? You following me? So, okay, there's water. That's good. And so that's what 2 Corinthians 6 means, or 2:6 means. He goes on, and I'll just say real quick that in this next passage here, what he's really saying is that we don't need to rely anymore on what he says, human traditions or elemental spirits of the world instead of Christ, right? We get to recognize that there's an ultimate authority that is Jesus. He holds all the things. He is the head and the rule of everything, okay? So, that's what it means, right? Only do what God says, not more, not less, and to get the rule straight, God is the one who does the actual work. So that sounds really good. So why wouldn't we want to do that, okay? Why would we not want to do that? Well, as it turns out, it's kind of hard, right? And it's counterintuitive. I think really that's probably the main obstacle. It is not the first thing that you think of. It's counterintuitive, but it is also hard, okay? And so I want to breeze through, hopefully, as I'm running out of time, a passage out of 2 Corinthians 12, okay? And in 2 Corinthians 12, the Apostle Paul is writing. He's kind of like at his peak frustration, you could say peak snarkiness, perhaps, depending on how you read him, peak sarcasm. Yeah, there's not a lot of places in Paul's writing that you see him quite get to this level. And so if you have your Bibles, actually, you can open it to 2 Corinthians 12. I'm only going to show a little bit about it. But it's a pretty remarkable passage. Really, the whole letter is for a number of reasons. And the context of it is really that Paul is trying to talk to the Corinthians about, in this particular section, about how they've fallen for what he calls the super apostles. He says this derisively, okay? So these people in Corinth, this church that Paul has planted, they've all come to Jesus because of Paul, because of Paul's presence there, because he brought the gospel there. And yet, after he left, these other interlopers came into the scene, these super apostles, and they came in with all these stories and all these things about how spiritual they are and how awesome they are. And they ended up attracting a lot of the attention of the Corinthians, really away from the message of Paul, really fundamentally away from Jesus and onto themselves. And Paul is trying to pull them back, right? He's trying to rescue them from that, and he's using all this language that's just trying to get to them, right, is how I would put it. And so he's pretty funny about it, and he says, well, if we're going to talk about credentials, if we're going to talk about who you want to listen to and who you don't want to listen to, let's talk about that, okay? And he very reluctantly starts talking about his own credentials and what he's brought to the table and the experiences that he's had with Jesus. And he's so reluctant, he talks about himself in the third person, which is really awkward. Have you ever had anybody start talking about themselves in the third person? It's weird, right? So he kind of does it in and out in the beginning of the chapter. And then after it, he really talks about his love for the Corinthians and how he's poured himself out for them. He's really talking about doing the stuff. He's talking about how he's been doing the stuff of the kingdom for the Corinthians. And in the middle of that, it's really not even his major point. He drops this gem. He drops this really famous verse in the middle of this discourse as he's frustrated with the Corinthians. That isn't his main point in some ways, but I think explains sort of everything. And is the thing I think we need to remember and know, okay? And so he says, starting in verse 7, he's been talking about this amazing revelation he had from Jesus. He says, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. He drops this awesome gem. If you've been a Christian for hopefully any length of time, I hope you've seen this verse, right? Or this passage. And we could talk a lot about what the thorn in the flesh is. If we were preaching this whole passage, we would go through it slowly and we would explain a lot of things. We don't have time for that, unfortunately. But really what he's aiming at here is a couple things. He points at this idea of to, quote unquote, keep me from being conceited. Let me phrase that another way. To keep me from becoming self-reliant, right? To keep me from thinking that I can really do this all on my own, that I've already received everything that I need from Jesus, and I don't need anything more, right? Those are some other ways to think about it. To keep me from being conceited, a thorn was given to me. It's a gift, really. But he was given this thorn in the flesh that he doesn't want. It's unpleasant. Relying on the sufficiency of Jesus can be unpleasant. And so it says he pleaded with the Lord 3 times to take it away, right? And Jesus says back, right? The Lord says back to him, my grace is sufficient for you. Why? Because my power is made perfect in weakness. Wow. And so, relying on the sufficiency of Jesus, it is kind of hard sometimes. It is counterintuitive. It can be unpleasant even. But man, it's really, really good. It's really, really good. And I just want to talk as we start closing up here. What do we gain by relying on Jesus' sufficiency? Okay? Let me just give you 3 things real quick, okay? First of all, we gain relationship. our focus becomes on our relationship with Jesus and not on the worldly results. Right? We were saying earlier, our intuition, what we want to do is we want to judge the outcomes right away. We want to jump to all sorts of conclusions about what it means about us, what it means about the world, what it even means about God. Okay? But when we rely on the sufficiency of Jesus, it frees us from that. We don't have to actually rely on the worldly results to point us to whether it's God or not, or how we might feel about ourselves. No, what we're gaining in it as we do that relying is the relationship. What Paul demonstrated for us. 3 times I begged the Lord to take it away, but he spoke back to me. Do you hear that? Do you hear that? That's relationship. That's the tenderness of God, even when the answer is no. But we gain relationship. We gain relationship with God. We gain relationship with each other as we rely on Jesus' sufficiency, because we're not blowing past all sorts of limits and boundaries, and we're not failing in our obligations that God has given us. So we gain relationship, number 1, okay? We'll just keep going. Number 2, we gain peace about our limitations. Wow, peace. Can you imagine that? I mean, really. How much of our anxieties, how much of the things that we get wrapped around on is based fundamentally on the idea that we're fighting our own constraints? That we don't like the ways that we're limited. We don't like the ways that we're constrained. We don't like the fact that we're weak. And so much of where we come from, so much of the reasons why we get wrapped up and that we get down and we feel disconnected is because we don't have peace about our limitations. But when we rely on Jesus' sufficiency, we can actually have peace about our limitations, our weaknesses, our strength. We can actually boast about that, as Paul says. It's pretty amazing. We can admit our constraints. We can be honest. We can be real with each other about what we can and can't do, right? And so we gain peace about our limitation. And finally, this is really the huge one, is we gain the ability to keep doing the stuff, right? Rather than shutting everything down when things don't go right and living in our disappointments, or really kind of a delay of that is rushing forward, doing lots of things that God hasn't actually asked us to do, which then at the end of that is shutting it all down, right? Rather than that, we can actually stay. We can have the ability, we can gain the ability to keep doing what Jesus wants us to do, because like I said at the beginning, he has lots and lots of things that he wants us to do. You know that, church? He has lots of things that he wants us to do. He cares about all the things that we are doing. He has instruction and grace and peace for us in those things. And so that's what we want to see, right? We want to become a people who know how to rely on Jesus' sufficiency. Here's our invitation this morning. You can have the worship team come up. Here's what I would just say. To notice when you have resistance or anxiety towards God, or what God might be saying to do or to not do. Right? The part of the way that we learn how to rely on Jesus' sufficiency is that we notice when it's not happening. Right? That's usually actually the easiest place to start. Is when you are getting worked up about something, or you're avoiding God, you're not sure if you can hear him or not. Resistance or anxiety. Those are pretty good words to summarize it. Notice that, right? And when you notice that, that's a pretty good sign that, okay, I think I need to know more about Jesus' sufficiency. And so then what I would invite is that we practice surrendering that self-sufficiency, or it may not be self-sufficiency, it might be dependency on others, right? Some of you guys are not in a place where you can really be self-sufficient yet, but you are depending on other people above Jesus. And what Jesus would say is trade that other sufficiency for Jesus' sufficiency, and you can just practice that in prayer, right? That's a great place to start. There's a lot of ways to do it, but practice it in prayer. We've set it up here before. You are God, and I am not. If you pray that regularly, or if you apply that to the things that you see in your life where you're experiencing resistance and anxiety towards Jesus, That'll help. Over the long term, I promise, it'll form you. Or just not my will, but yours be done, right? All of those certain things. For me, it's like, I would just say, kind of aside from my kids, my family, right? The thing that I care most about is you guys, is this church, is the work that God is doing in here. This calling of pastoring and leading here is like the thing that, outside of my family is the thing I care most about. And what I would say is that in that process, right, of walking out that calling, and this is going to be true for you as you continue to walk out the things that God calls you to do. It's like the deeper you get with it, the more entrenched in it you get, the more you realize that you just don't have what it takes, right? You don't. And that can either breed insecurity, it can breed discouragement, disappointment, or it can teach us to rely on the sufficiency of Jesus.